It was Christmas Eve in the northern suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. I was standing barefoot on the snow-covered front porch. The biting Midwestern wind felt like tiny razors against my skin, cutting right through my thin cashmere sweater. Snow was already piling up around my bare feet, while the luxury holiday lights hanging from the mansion behind me flashed in a mocking rhythm. Porch. My mother Elaine's sharp, bitter voice was still ringing in my ears, cutting even deeper than the sub-zero wind. She told me I could never accomplish anything on my own, that I was completely useless. Right after that, a heavy black trash bag was shoved into my arms, filled with God knows what. A second later, my father Richard slammed the heavy custom mahogany front door right in my face. Porch. The impact nearly shook the expensive holiday wreath off the wood, and the heavy brass deadbolt snapped shut. To me, that click sounded like a final gavel coming down in a courtroom. Behind me, warm light spilled from the windows of every single home on one of the top 10 wealthiest streets in the country. Porch. Through the glass, you could see traditional holiday dinners, smell the roasted turkey, and hear laughter from families who actually cared about each other. And then there was me, standing out in a blizzard without a coat, without a home, and without a single family member who would claim me. Behind the curtains of the neighboring houses, a few neighbors were secretly looking out. Porch. In a wealthy neighborhood that cared so much about appearances and reputation, they clearly saw the Carringtons throw their own daughter out like a bag of spoiled trash. But of course, they would just pretend nothing happened. Shivering, I pulled out my phone. The screen showed no service, and my Chase banking app displayed a balance of just $182. Porch. That was literally every penny I owned. In a society where credit scores and cards run everything, that was not even enough for one night and a deposit at a basic hotel in downtown Chicago. For the first time in my life, I truly felt what it was like to be completely abandoned and treated as worthless. Porch. Right then, my numb fingers brushed against the inside pocket of my sweater and felt something hard, cold, and metallic. It was an old black card my grandfather Henry had slipped to me when I was 6 years old. I still remember the look in his eyes when he told me to only use it when I had nowhere else to turn, when I had truly hit rock bottom. Porch. I forced my frozen feet to move, stepping down the porch toward my beat-up used Honda Civic parked in the driveway. The snow was slippery under my thin flats, and I nearly fell twice. When I reached the sidewalk, a tree branch snagged the heavy trash bag in my arms. It ripped open, and everything spilled out onto the snow. Porch. It was not my clothes, not my social security card, not my passport, and not a single personal item that actually belonged to me. It was just useless junk, a bleach-stained rag, a shattered holiday ornament, and a burnt candle stub. They could not even grant me the basic dignity of handing back my own things. Porch. When I turned the key in the ignition, the engine let out a painful screech, as if it did not want to cooperate on a freezing night like this either. Honestly, I felt the exact same way. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking so violently that the key ring kept rattling. My breath clouded the inside of the windshield. Porch. The car heater had been broken for months, blowing nothing but freezing air against my face. I stared at the house where I grew up, locked behind a door. My parents made sure I would never walk through again. My mind kept replaying what happened 20 minutes earlier. Dinner had burned in the oven because my mother was too busy criticizing my posture and career choices. Porch. My father was loudly complaining at the table about the bill for the outdoor holiday light installation. And my spoiled older brother, Michael, rolled his eyes at every single word I said. The real breaking point came when my father slid a home equity loan document across the table and told me to co-sign it. Porch. Michael's tech startup was failing once again, and my parents had ruined their own credit through overspending. They could not get another low-interest loan from the bank, so they targeted my clean credit record and demanded that I take on the financial risk as a co-signer. When I looked them in the eye and firmly said I would not take on that kind of debt, It was like a fuse blew in the house. Porch. All of a sudden, I was labeled an ungrateful, selfish parasite. The harsh words came faster than the falling snow. My mother lashed out first, screaming that I was the biggest embarrassment to the family name. My father followed, pointing straight at the door and ordering me to get out, his voice echoing through the foyer. Porch. If I had not lived it myself, I never would have believed how fast my own family could discard me. For years, they had manipulated my reality, telling me I could never survive without them, and that I would always come crawling back. Sitting in that freezing car, staring at their warm, brightly lit windows, something shifted deep inside me. I was never going back. Not ever. Porch. Still, having the willpower to walk away is very different from having a way to survive. My stomach cramped, reminding me I had not eaten since yesterday. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was almost midnight. My body felt fragile, like hollow glass that could shatter at any moment. Porch. I tried looking up nearby motels, but during the holidays, even the cheapest roadside rooms had raised their prices out of my reach. I thought about calling friends, but over the years, my mother had quietly isolated me from my entire social circle. She would criticize my friends and create misunderstandings until everyone drifted away. Part of me wondered if this was what she wanted all along. Porch. To make me so isolated and helpless that I would have no choice but to obey her forever. I refused to let this be the end of my story. I started the car and drove down the unplowed road toward a 24-hour retro diner on the edge of town. It was the only place where I could spend a couple of dollars and sit for hours without being asked to leave. Porch. By the time I pulled under the flickering neon sign, the snow was already ankle-deep. The chime above the glass door rang as I pushed it open. The night shift waitress looked up at me. Her expression held a mix of sympathy and the cautious distance typical of late-night service workers. I slipped into a red vinyl booth in the corner and ordered the cheapest cup of drip coffee on the menu. Porch. I wrapped my numb hands around the white ceramic mug, treating it like the only source of warmth left in the world. Then, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment inside my thin sweater, the black metal card slipped out of my pocket. It hit the laminate tabletop with a sharp metallic clink. I froze. I remembered the day my grandfather gave it to me like it was yesterday. Porch. I was 6 years old, sitting on his lap, in the backyard of his old house in Oak Park, while my parents were inside arguing loudly about money. He placed the heavy card into my small hands and spoke in a quiet, serious voice. He told me that one day I might need it, and that I should only use it when I had no one else to turn to. Back then, I naively told him I would never need it. Porch. I thought my parents loved me. At least, that was what I believed at the time. The waitress walked by with a coffee pot to offer a refill. Her eyes caught the card on the table, and she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened, and she quickly looked away, almost as if she had seen something she was not supposed to see. Porch. She whispered under her breath, asking how I could possibly have one of those, before quickly hurrying back toward the kitchen without even pouring the coffee. I took a deep breath and ran my thumb over the smooth metal surface. There was no cardholder name, no Visa or MasterCard logo, just a string of numbers engraved in dark gold. Porch. It was heavier and thicker than any standard debit or credit card, carrying an understated authority. It felt less like a payment card and more like a key meant to open a door to a world I had never seen. With my phone battery sitting at 3%, I quickly searched the lasers-etched bank name in the corner, Cumberland National Trust. Porch. The search results showed it was a private wealth management institution serving legacy families and ultra-high net worth clients in Chicago. The only branch nearby was located in the downtown financial district on LaSalle Street, opening at 6 the next morning. Porch. The photos showed massive marble pillars and heavy brass hardware, looking like something out of a classic movie, far removed from someone currently budgeting for a cup of coffee. Grandfather Henry had given me this card. If there was ever a moment I needed whatever lifeline he had prepared, It was right now. My phone screen went completely black. The battery was dead. Orch. I sat in that booth for 2 full hours, nursing that single cup of coffee. The waitress refilled my mug twice without charging me, and she never mentioned the card again. Maybe she felt sorry for me, or maybe she just recognized the look of someone trying their hardest not to fall apart. Orch. I kept my palm pressed firmly over the card the entire time, terrified of drawing attention and terrified of losing the one chance I had left. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I walked back out to my car, curled up across the back seat, and pulled the thin cashmere sweater over my knees. As my breath frosted the windows, the temperature inside the cabin dropped fast. Orch. My fingers went numb first, then my toes. Fear started to settle in. It was the specific kind of dread that only comes when you realize you truly have nowhere safe to sleep. My mind went back to Grandfather Henry. His warm, calloused hands, his quiet smile, and the serious way he looked at me, as if he knew what was coming. Maybe he did know. Maybe this was his way of protecting me ahead of time. Orch. I whispered into the cold darkness, hoping he really knew what he was doing. I pressed the black card against my chest under my sweater, feeling it against my heartbeat. I was banking everything on tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, I would walk into that private bank and find out whether this card was just an old man's forgotten promise, or something that could change my entire life. Orch. For the first time since being cast out into the snow, a tiny flicker of warmth returned inside me. It was not full hope yet, but it was a real possibility, and in a situation like mine, a possibility was enough to keep me going through the night. By 6 in the morning, light snow was falling beneath a gray Chicago sky. Orch. I pulled my rattling Honda Civic into the nearly empty client parking area at Cumberland National Trust. Warm light shone through the massive brass-framed windows. My stomach was tied in knots. I had barely slept on the back seat of the car, and my fingers were still stiff from the cold. The unusual black card in my pocket was the only thing keeping me upright. Orch. I sat there with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. I spent a full minute trying to convince myself I had not completely lost my mind. My mother's harsh words echoed in my head again, telling me I would amount to nothing on my own. If I did not walk through those doors right now, her prediction would become my reality. I was not going to let that happen. Orch. I opened the door and stepped out into the freezing morning air, feeling the sharp wind coming off Michigan. I walked toward the towering building. The marble columns and heavy brass doors made it very clear what this place was. This was genuine, generational wealth. Orch. My parents had spent their lives trying to project this exact level of prestige at their country club, even while drowning in high mortgage payments every month. A private trust like this was never meant for people barely keeping up appearances on borrowed credit. And it certainly did not seem meant for me, unless what my grandfather told me years ago was actually true. Orch. I pushed open the heavy glass door into a lobby filled with the scent of polished mahogany, rich carpets, and fresh pine. A receptionist in her 50s looked up from behind a wide mahogany desk, offering a practiced, professional smile, the kind reserved for visitors who might have taken a wrong turn. She politely asked how she could help me today. My voice caught in my throat. Orch. I cleared it and tried to keep my words steady, explaining that I needed to check the balance on an old account and that I had the card. I slid the heavy black metal card across the marble counter. Her polite smile vanished instantly. It was not out of rudeness, but pure shock and immediate recognition. Orch. She carefully picked up the card with white-gloved fingers, examining it as if it were a rare artifact. She kept her voice low, speaking with genuine deference, and told me she would notify the general manager immediately. The general manager? Just for a simple balance inquiry. My exhausted, anxious mind immediately jumped to the worst possibilities. Orch. Maybe the account had been closed for years due to inactivity. Maybe the card was just an old system error. Maybe security was about to walk me out the door for wasting their time. I sat down in a leather armchair near the window, resting my hands in my lap. A well-dressed mother walked past with a toddler who was giggling and reaching for her cashmere scarf. A retired couple sat a few yards away, quietly reviewing a stack of trust documents. They were just regular people going about their morning routines. None of them had slept in a freezing car last night. None of them were officially without a home. None of them were sitting here because their own parents had locked them out in a winter storm. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Just as I was about to stand up and leave to avoid further embarrassment, a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit walked down the hallway. He looked like someone straight out of a major financial publication, perfectly put together, composed and professional. He looked down at the driver's license I had handed the front desk and addressed me by name, asking if I was Miss Carrington. I managed to say yes. He introduced himself as Elliot Hayes, the branch general manager and head of private wealth. He asked me to follow him into a private conference room so we could review the account details properly. My heart was pounding against my ribs. A private room sounded far too serious. I stood up and followed him down a quiet hallway lined with framed black and white portraits of the bank's original founders. Their stern expressions seemed to look down at me, reinforcing the feeling that I did not belong. Elliot's office was spacious, carrying a clean scent of cedarwood and polished leather. He motioned for me to take a seat, then closed the soundproof wooden door behind us. He sat behind a large walnut desk, clasped his hands together, and explained that before we proceeded, federal financial regulations and the bank's internal security protocols required a formal identity verification. My hands trembled as I handed over my Illinois driver's license. He verified the details and entered several authorization codes into his system. The glow from the monitor reflected off his glasses as he worked in silence. I noticed his brow lift slightly, just for a second. He looked up and spoke in a steady, focused tone. He explained that the card I brought in was the physical key to a top-tier legacy trust account, one that had remained inactive for many years. He slowly turned the monitor toward me, and in that moment, my breath completely stopped. The screen was filled with complex legal filings, encrypted files, and an asset breakdown that looked nothing like a regular checking or savings account. In the upper corner, highlighted in green, was a status line that made no sense given my current situation. Account status: fully active. I whispered under my breath, asking if it was really active. Elliot confirmed it with complete seriousness, adding that it was fully active and held under the highest level of legal protection. I swallowed hard and asked who it was being protected from. He paused, looked directly at me, and said it was protected from everyone except me. Those words hit me with immense weight. My grandfather Henry had never been a man of exaggeration or theatrics. He never left things to chance. But he had left this, whatever this truly meant. Elliot brought up an internal trust memo, dated 23 years ago. When I saw the name listed at the top, my eyes widened. Henry Carrington. My grandfather. Elliot explained that my grandfather had established this irrevocable living trust when I was only 6 years old. He left strict legal instructions stating that the account and all connected holdings could only be accessed by his granddaughter, Lena, in person upon presenting the physical legacy card. No representatives, guardians, or powers of attorney were ever permitted to intervene. A wave of dizziness hit me. The office suddenly felt entirely unreal. Elliot leaned forward slightly, his tone softening with genuine empathy. He asked if he could ask why I had decided to bring the card in today. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling again, but I did not try to hide it. I told him calmly that my parents had locked me out of the house the night before, on Christmas Eve. I explained that they had tried to force me into signing a debt agreement, and when I refused, they would not even let me take my personal belongings or identification. I had no money for a place to stay, and I simply did not know where else to turn. Elliot's expression remained professional, but his demeanor softened noticeably. He simply said he understood. Porch. Those few words carried something I had not heard in years. Genuine respect and validation from someone who had no personal motive to appease me. I tried to keep my composure and admitted that I had not even known if there was any money left in the account. I only remembered my grandfather telling me to use it if I hit a wall. Porch. Elliot nodded slowly, noting that my grandfather's actions had been entirely deliberate. He clicked into another encrypted section, and numbers began populating the screen. The air in the room felt crisp and heavy. I could barely get the words out to ask if that was the balance. Elliot did not rush to answer. Porch. He let the reality settle between us before gently turning the monitor all the way around so every figure was completely clear. At first, I could not bring myself to look. I was terrified. Terrified it might only be a few $100s. And equally terrified it might be an amount that completely redefined my reality. When I finally looked at the screen, my entire world shifted. Porch. I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the long string of digits and commas. My pulse raced, and a loud ringing filled my ears. I whispered that it was impossible, that there had to be a mistake. Elliot kept his voice completely steady, assuring me there was no mistake at all. The breath left my lungs completely. Porch. I brought my hands to my face, letting out a sharp gasp like someone suddenly breaking the surface of deep water. The number on the screen was not modest. It was not even just substantial. It was an extraordinary, life-altering figure that went beyond anything I could have imagined. I shook my head, my breathing shallow, saying that my parents had always claimed he had nothing. Porch. They always said he lived on a modest monthly benefit check, that he could barely manage it on his own, let alone support anyone else. Elliot rested his hands on the desk and looked at me intently. He stated clearly that my parents were never granted access to this trust, because my grandfather's legal directives had been explicitly designed to keep them completely separated from it. Porch. My throat tightened, and my eyes filled with tears. For years, I had believed my grandfather had simply forgotten about me. I had accepted the narrative my parents fed me, that he had grown distant, confused, and uncaring, and that I should not bother him with visits. None of that was true. He cared deeply. Porch. He cared enough to anticipate this exact turning point and prepare for it decades in advance. I pressed a trembling hand against my chest, feeling my heart beating fast. Through tears, I asked why he had done all of this specifically for me. Elliot opened a locked drawer, retrieved a red document folder sealed with security tape, and placed it carefully on the desk between us. Porch. He told me it was because my grandfather wanted me to know the truth. The entire truth. I stared down at the red folder. Across the front, written in my grandfather's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting, were the words, "For Lena when the time comes to claim your independence." My chest tightened. Elliot looked directly at me and said he believed it was time for me to read what was inside. Porch. With those words, the foundation of my past completely shifted. Elliot angled the screen even closer, giving me time to process the figures. At first, the numbers did not register as real money. I had only ever seen sums like that in headlines about major corporate transactions. My pulse was racing. Porch. For a brief second, I wondered if this was the account of some prominent industrialist from the news, someone who had nothing to do with me. Then Elliot spoke in a quiet, respectful tone, confirming that this account belonged entirely to me. My chest ached as I looked at the screen again. $63,800,000. Porch. I gripped the leather armrests until my knuckles turned white. The ground beneath me felt completely altered. My voice broke as I tried to explain that I could not even afford a motel room hours ago. I had spent the night freezing in an old car, using a sweater as a blanket. Porch. I was someone who carefully budgeted every grocery trip down to the last penny, yet here I was looking at an amount far beyond anything my parents had ever seen in their lives. I choked up, asking how any of this could be real. Elliot did not dismiss my reaction or try to soften the reality. He simply gave a firm, clear nod. He confirmed it was entirely real, and added that this was only the liquid portion of the estate. That financial term made my stomach drop. Elliot began navigating through different tabs, and each one revealed another significant asset. Commercial real estate deeds. Prime land holdings across 3 Illinois counties. Substantial equity in major blue-chip corporations frequently cited in financial news. A significant ownership stake in a leading industrial robotics firm. My grandfather, the quiet man I remembered wearing the same worn sweater, eating simple soup for lunch, and saving coupons as a matter of principle, had held an extensive financial portfolio. It was an entire foundation of real security. While I was still looking at the screen, Elliot gently slid the red folder within my reach. He handled it with care, as if it contained something truly vital. He explained that these were the records my grandfather had ordered, sealed at the highest level of confidentiality, to be opened only when I walked in with the legacy card. The word legacy resonated deeply. With trembling hands, I untied the binding on the folder. The first item was a handwritten letter addressed to me in my grandfather's fluid script. Just seeing his handwriting made my throat burn, but before I could read the letter itself, a bold line printed across the top of the interior document caught my eye. Strictly for Lena. The full record regarding your parents. A chill ran down my spine. I started to ask why he had documented this, but could barely finish the thought. Elliot spoke with measured composure, explaining that my grandfather had been exceptionally methodical. His clear objective was to ensure that once I was out from under their influence, I would have the complete facts. Hearing an independent professional describe my family dynamic so accurately brought a wave of nausea. My parents had not just been strict or protective, they had been the controlling and manipulative, eroding my confidence in ways I had never been able to fully articulate until now. I turned the page. A detailed chronological record of the last decade of my grandfather's life lay before me. There were complete medical evaluations and psychiatric assessments confirming his full legal competence and mental clarity right up to his passing. There were banking records and legal correspondence, all documented to the highest evidentiary standards in case his decisions were ever challenged in court. My parents had always told me he was confused, that his memory was gone, and that he had lost touch with reality. They used that to explain why he left them nothing, why he supposedly wanted no visitors, and why I should never disturb him. It was all completely false. The documents told a painful truth. He had reached out repeatedly, asking my parents to let me visit him. He had written to me constantly, but my mother had intercepted every single letter. The folder contained copies of those returned and unsent letters, none of which I had ever been allowed to see. One of the letters read, "My dear girl, I think of you every single day. They make excuses to keep us apart, and while I cannot change their choices, you must always remember that I care about you more than anything in this world." A tear dropped onto the paper, smudging the ink before I could catch it. My vision blurred as I held the folder, feeling the reality of those lost years. My voice broke as I whispered that I had never received any of them. Elliot replied softly, confirming that my grandfather had long suspected the communications were being blocked. I turned to the next page. It was a formal legal declaration my grandfather had filed years ago following a suspicious incident. In the event of any sudden harm or unexplained circumstance involving my estate, I direct that a full legal review be initiated regarding Richard and Elaine Carrington. Seeing my parents' names listed under formal allegations of coercive behavior and financial manipulation made my stomach turn. My grandfather understood exactly who they were and what they were capable of. He recognized what they were doing to him, and he foresaw what they would eventually try to do to me. I picked up the personal letter he had left for me and carefully unfolded it. "My Lena, If you are reading this, it means the situation I anticipated has finally taken place, and they have cast you aside. I hoped this day would not come, but I understood their need for control all too well. George, you need to know the truth. Nothing they said to diminish your worth was ever accurate. You were never weak, and you were never a burden. You were the only genuine, caring part of this family. Everything I built was put in place for you, because I knew that one day you would need the resources to secure your own independence. Take this opportunity, my dear girl. George. Use it to build a life on your own terms, free from their constraints. You are the true legacy I leave behind. With all my love, Grandfather Henry. I pressed the letter tightly against my chest, an overwhelming sob breaking through as the weight of years of self-doubt finally lifted. For so long, I believed I had been forgotten. I believed I was not worth remembering. I was wrong. George. My parents had used every manipulative tactic to convince me I was incapable and dependent. They wanted me small, quiet, and compliant, building my entire sense of identity around the false idea that I had no value on my own. Yet right here in this red folder was irrefutable proof to the contrary. George. The one person who truly understood me had secured an entire foundation for my future, fully convinced that I deserved a better life. Tears streaming down my face, I asked once more why he chose me, instead of my father or my brother. Elliot looked at me with deep, steady empathy. He said it was because I was the only one my grandfather trusted. George. He saw through their motives long before I could, and more than anything, I was the only person in the family who genuinely cared for him without expecting anything in return. I swallowed hard as memories came rushing back. I remembered sitting in his garden on quiet afternoons listening to his stories while my parents mocked his simple lifestyle inside the house. George. Back then, I never understood the quiet sadness and knowing clarity in his eyes whenever he looked at me. Now, everything finally made sense. Now I finally understood. I turned to the next page. More evidence peeled back, more layers of hypocrisy, revealing an even darker reality beneath. George. The records showed that during a year when Henry was hospitalized after a mild stroke, my father, Richard, had actually tried to use legal maneuvers to force through a medical and financial power of attorney over him, aiming to place him in a locked care facility. But the attending physician flatly refused to sign the declaration of mental incapacity. George. Other documents detailed how my mother, Elaine, had repeatedly pressured Henry emotionally, trying to coerce him into pouring massive amounts of capital into Michael's doomed tech venture. When Henry saw it for the bottomless pit it was and firmly declined, they cut off all communication with him. George. They did not keep him from seeing me out of concern for his health. They did it because they were furious that he refused to surrender control of his assets. I closed the folder, my breath still uneven and shallow. I looked up and asked what we were supposed to do now. Elliot clasped his hands on the desk, his demeanor returning to that of a seasoned private wealth executive. George. He explained that from here on out, the decisions were entirely mine to make. But before moving forward, there was one final file. My grandfather had left it behind, but it required my biometric authentication to access. He set a compact, high-security biometric scanner on the desk, connected to an encrypted solid-state drive. George. He kept his voice low, explaining that inside was the core documentation regarding my family, along with my grandfather's direct strategic framework for my future. The room fell completely silent, and my heart began to pound against my ribs. He looked at me and asked if I was ready. Was I ready? Just last night, my parents had discarded me into a freezing winter storm like household trash. George. They made sure I walked away with nothing. No money, no clothes, no roof over my head, and they tried to strip away every ounce of my self-worth. Yet the very man they had written off as a senile, penniless relic had quietly built an expansive financial foundation in the background, placing every single cornerstone directly into my hands. George. I did not know if I felt ready, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had to be. I pressed my thumb against the scanner, A green light flashed, the encrypted drive unlocked, and line after line of system logs began to load across the screen. Elliot watched the monitor intently, his expression growing deeply serious. "Torch," he murmured almost to himself that there was something here my grandfather had strictly forbidden anyone from accessing until this exact moment. The final file fully loaded. Elliot let out a long, slow breath and turned the screen toward me, telling me I needed to see this for myself. The encrypted records unspooled line by line, the cursor pulsing steadily like a heartbeat monitor. Torch. In sharp contrast, my own pulse was pounding so loudly in my ears that it drowned out the quiet hum of the climate control in Elliot's office. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but every inhale felt tight and strained. Once the display stabilized, Elliot angled the monitor directly in front of me. "Torch." He spoke gently, explaining that this file was meant to be unsealed only if my grandfather's concerns materialized. Specifically, if my parents attempted to cause substantive financial, emotional, or personal harm against me. The first record opened automatically. Across the top ran a bold header. "Strictly for Lena, a complete investigative record regarding your parents." Torch. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I rested my hands on my lap, trying to stop them from visibly shaking. But it was useless. I clicked on the first file. A comprehensive 10-year timeline unfolded before my eyes. 10 full years of detailed investigative reports, intercepted email correspondence, audio transcripts, and notarized legal declarations. Torch. Every single entry was either penned or formally signed by my grandfather. My throat constricted, feeling tight and closed off. The first memo read, "My son and his wife have begun using emotional pressure in an attempt to seize control over all my financial decisions." I blinked, reading the sentence twice. My parents had spent years telling the world he was forgetful and disconnected from reality. Torch. My mother would shake her head with exaggerated sympathy and heavy sighs, telling the neighbors that old Henry was losing his faculties. My father would claim he was unstable, even warning me to stay away because visiting would supposedly agitate him. Yet the phrasing in this note was steady, sharp, and razor-focused. There was not a trace of confusion in it. I scrolled down. Torch. Another entry appeared, accompanied by a scanned medical evaluation. Patient demonstrates full legal and mental capacity. No signs of dementia or cognitive impairment detected. Independent living is strongly advised to continue alongside routine medical follow-ups. Signed by the Chief of Psychiatry at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I felt as though the floor had vanished beneath my chair. Torch. Every narrative my parents had ever fed me about my grandfather collapsed like a house of cards. They claimed he could no longer manage his daily affairs. They claimed he was embarrassed to see me due to physical decline. They claimed he no longer recognized who I was and refused visitors entirely. It was all manufactured. Torch. The next set of files contained personal letters handwritten in his familiar, flowing script. Every single one was addressed to me, dated during the exact periods when my parents claimed he wanted nothing to do with anyone. My breath caught. There were dozens of them. I opened the first one. "My dearest Lena, I have written to you twice without a response." Torch. I can only assume your parents are withholding the mail. A sharp, ragged sound caught in my throat. I had not realized I could sound so broken. In that moment, I felt like a 10-year-old girl again, sitting on the edge of my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling and crying, wondering why I seemed to matter so little in that house. I opened another letter. Torch. "Today I asked them once again to let you come visit. They told me coldly that you were too busy. I want you to know that if it were up to me, I would drop everything just to see you." A tear slipped from my cheek and hit the walnut desk. I quickly wiped it away, feeling momentarily self-conscious. Torch. But Elliot remained professionally silent, offering the kind of quiet respect that gave me space to process the weight of the moment. Another file loaded onto the screen. This time it was an official transcript. Cumberland National Trust closed session record. Attendees: Henry Carrington, Senior Wealth Manager EH, Compliance Officer. Orch. An attached audio file played, and my grandfather's voice came through the speaker. It carried the natural frailty of his advanced age, but his thoughts were completely clear and deliberate. My son and daughter-in-law attempted to have a medical board declare me mentally incompetent today. Orch. They brought legal documents drafted by their attorneys in an effort to deceive me into signing away my autonomy. I refused, and I had them removed from the premises. I paused the recording, my hands shaking even harder. My own parents had actually attempted to strip him of his financial rights and have him legally declared incapacitated. Orch. It was the exact same playbook they had used on me behind closed doors, wearing me down without needing a banker's signature. I asked in a shaky voice when this happened. Elliot checked the timestamp. 9 years ago, the exact year I graduated from high school. That was the year they completely barred me from seeing him, claiming it was for his own good. It had nothing to do with his well-being. Orch. It was because my grandfather stood as an immovable wall between them and his estate, and I was the only person he cared enough to protect. I kept scrolling through the files, finding more concrete documentation. A note from his attending physician read, "The adult children's conduct appears strictly driven by financial interest, rather than the patient's welfare. Orch. Strong legal safeguards are recommended immediately." My pulse pounded in my ears. Elliot leaned forward slightly, reminding me that my grandfather had made it clear to the bank that I was the only person he trusted. I swallowed hard and asked why he had never told me, why he had never warned me about how far they would go. Orch. Elliot answered gently, explaining that he had tried, but my parents had systematically severed every line of communication between us. I closed my eyes. They had not just isolated my grandfather, they had cut me off from him entirely, severing my connection with the only person who truly loved me. I scrolled to the section labeled Attempted Asset Takeovers. Orch. It contained scanned bank statements, restraining order filings, and a formal complaint my grandfather had submitted to the Illinois court system. They had attempted to claim full authority over his accounts by alleging incapacity. They had shown up with attorneys demanding fund releases. Orch. They had even attempted to draft paperwork to reroute his capital into a family trust where they were named primary beneficiaries. When I saw the handwritten note my grandfather had added at the bottom of the complaint, my stomach dropped once again. If anything happens to me, use every legal avenue available to protect Lena from their reach. Those words felt permanently etched into my mind. Orch. I kept reading. Another series of documents revealed how my parents had systematically told their country club, their neighbors, and their social circle that my grandfather was an unstable, failing old man. They had spent years poisoning the reputation of the one person who saw straight through their facade. Orch. A chain of private emails between my mother and father appeared on the screen. Correspondence I was never meant to see, filled with cold, calculating calculations. The old man needs to hand over control, or he will waste all that capital on meaningless causes. This belongs to us by right. We carry the Carrington name. If we let Lena keep seeing him, he is going to leave assets directly to her. Orch. We have to keep her away. Everything finally, painfully, made complete sense. The sudden coldness, the endless guilt-tripping, the silent treatments, the convenient times they forgot to mention, my grandfather had called, the strict rules keeping me distant. They did all of it simply because my grandfather loved me, and they could not tolerate what that meant for their plans. My throat burned. Orch. I scrolled down again. A mapping system opened up, displaying an aerial overview of the country dotted with red pins, marked parcels, and detailed notes. A typed label read, Protected Trust Holdings. Comprehensive assets slated for direct transfer to Lena. There were 10 distinct markers, 10 major holdings. It was far more than just cash and liquid stock. Orch. There were prime commercial real estate developments, thousands of acres of deeded land, and his original founding equity in an industrial robotics company now valued in the tens of billions. He had quietly constructed an entire foundation of real security, intentionally keeping it out of reach from anyone looking to exploit it. I opened the very last document in the folder. It was a note written in his light, trembling hand. My dearest Lena, if you are reading this, what I feared most has finally happened, and they have turned their backs on you. Do not let them back into your life. They will only continue to take until you have nothing left to give. Use the resources I have provided to build a life on your own terms. You have always deserved far more than they were willing to offer. I am sorry I could not be there longer to offer protection in person, but I have prepared everything you need. When their true motives are fully exposed, you will finally see your own strength. You are not their subordinate. You are not a burden. You are not a failure. You are my legacy, Henry. I was trembling so much I could barely hold the paper. For years, I had been conditioned to believe I was incapable, unwanted, and an inconvenience to my family. Every single part of that narrative was a lie. They had pushed me away not because I lacked value, but because they were terrified of what I might inherit, both financially and emotionally. They were terrified of me discovering the truth and becoming entirely independent of their control. A faint click came from the mahogany door behind me as Elliot stood up. He spoke with calm authority, explaining that there was one final procedural step. To safeguard the secure vault containing his ultimate legal, financial, and personal directives, my grandfather had established multi-tier security protocols. We needed a second biometric scan to release it. My head was still spinning. I asked if there was really more. He answered without hesitation that there was a great deal more. I looked down at the heavy black metal card resting on the desk. It carried a distinct presence, almost as if tying me back to a part of my history I was just beginning to reclaim. My entire life had been shaped by a script written by my parents. Today, that script was completely dismantled. The real journey was just getting started. I sat up straight in the leather chair, wiped the remaining tears from my face, and told him to show me everything my grandfather had left behind. Elliot gave a nod of approval and initiated the final biometric scan. Green lights flashed across the console, signaling that the future was officially mine to take. Clutching the red confidential folder tightly against my chest, Lena stepped through the marble revolving doors of Cumberland National Trust. Light snow fell onto her thin cashmere sweater, melting instantly, but she hardly registered the cold. Her mind was overloaded, processing the sheer volume of reality that had just been handed to her. $63.8 million in liquid capital, commercial real estate, major tech equity, dozens of intercepted letters, a decade of deceit and control by her own parents. Her life had been built on a foundation of falsehoods, but underneath it all lay genuine security. In that quiet, wood-paneled office, her understanding of her entire past had been taken apart and rebuilt into something real. Her limbs felt light, buzzing with adrenaline, yet she felt an unfamiliar sense of relief and clarity. She reached her weathered Honda, got into the driver's seat, and left the engine off. Sitting there in silence, she gripped the steering wheel and rested her forehead against the cold rim. Frost was slowly creeping across the edges of the windshield, blurring the parking lot outside. She closed her eyes and took a long, deep breath. She was not broken. She was not useless. She was never the incapable person her parents claimed she was. The evidence was right in her hands. Yet, alongside this undeniable truth came a heavy question. Where did she go from here? The black metal card was warm in her pocket now. She pulled it out and traced the engraved gold numbers with her thumb. Knowing her grandfather had foreseen this turning point and spent years preparing a foundation for her, gave her both a profound sense of protection and a deep ache for the time they had lost. After sitting quietly for nearly 20 minutes, she sat up and cleared her face. She was not going to break down in a bank parking lot, especially not now that she held real leverage over her own life. Suddenly, her phone buzzed sharply against the passenger seat. The screen lit up with an unknown number, displaying a single text. "We need to talk. Answer your phone right now." Ouch. A tight knot hit her stomach. It was her mother's unmistakable, demanding tone. Before the familiar conditioning of anxiety could take hold, Lena took a steadying breath and firmly tapped block number. She turned the key and started the car. Driving away from LaSalle Street, the distance from the bank made the morning feel even more surreal. Ouch. It felt almost like an out-of-body experience, looking back at the person named Lena from just 12 hours ago. The girl who had pulled into a late-night diner in the middle of a blizzard was desperate, freezing, and without a place to sleep. The woman leaving Cumberland National Trust was entirely different. Ouch. She was not suddenly immune to the emotional pain, and she was far from fully healed, but she was no longer a person who could be manipulated and cast aside at will. After driving through the city for a while, she pulled up in front of an independent coffee shop she used to visit during her undergraduate days near Northwestern. Ouch. Warm amber light glowed through the fogged glass, and the rich scent of cinnamon rolls and dark roast drifted through the cold air. The shop door chime chimed softly as patrons walked in and out. She needed to sit down. She needed time to think and catch her breath like an ordinary person, rather than someone running from the wreckage of her former life. Ouch. Inside, a holiday tree decorated with handmade ornaments by local school kids glowed in the corner. An elderly couple sat near the window, quietly smiling over a newspaper article, while the barista hummed along to the blues playing over the speakers. Everything felt so normal, and that everyday warmth made her recent experience feel all the more striking. Ouch. She slid into a quiet corner booth, her hand still carrying a slight tremor, and opened the red folder once again. The documentation was impeccably organized and categorized. It was a complete roadmap left behind by the one person who truly cared for her, securing a future she had not even realized she needed. But there was still more. Ouch. Elliot had mentioned another meeting with another key person. She checked her phone and found a new voicemail from the bank. "Miss Carrington, this is Elliot. Before you leave the city today, please make sure to return to the branch. We need to complete the full estate disclosure alongside our senior trust specialist. This is extremely important." She closed her eyes and let out a quiet breath. Ouch. Calling it important was an understatement. 20 minutes later, she was walking back through the marble lobby of Cumberland National Trust. Snowmelt from her boots left dark marks on the tailored runners. Elliot met her immediately, his demeanor noticeably more focused and urgent than earlier that morning. Ouch. He introduced her to a silver-haired woman with a sharp, discerning gaze and a presence as solid as seasoned oak. The woman extended a hand with a firm grip, introducing herself as Marjorie Keene, the principal administrator of her grandfather's trust for the past 22 years. Lena asked if she had known him well. Ouch. Marjorie's expression softened slightly as she noted that he was one of the most deliberate, brilliant clients of her career, and that he spoke of Lena constantly. Those words resonated deeply, making Lena catch her breath. Marjorie led them into the bank's highest security private boardroom. Ouch. Across the large mahogany conference table lay layers of documentation. Property surveys, certified valuations, legal memoranda, and detailed summaries of diversified holdings. In the center of the table sat a smaller, intricately secured ebony wood chest. Ouch. Marjorie placed a hand on the lid, explaining that her grandfather had given explicit instructions for this to be held in trust exclusively for her. Opening it required dual authorization, one from her biometric profile and one from her grandfather's. Lena asked how that was possible, given that her grandfather had passed away. Ouch. Marjorie explained that he had recorded a formal video directive tied to voice recognition authentication before his passing, which would now be verified alongside her fingerprint. Lena looked down at the ebony chest, feeling the gravity of what it represented. It was not simply a container of wealth. It was an act of deliberate foresight, enduring protection, and genuine care. Porch. Marjorie asked gently if she was ready. Lena nodded, stepping forward despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. The scanner chimed, the green indicator flashed, and a solid mechanical click echoed from inside the chest. When Marjorie lifted the lid, the weight of the moment settled across the room. Porch. Inside was a series of organized keys, each tagged with neat, handwritten labels. Secure climate-controlled storage units, an unfamiliar estate address, executive building access cards, and several primary land deeds marked strictly not for sale. Beneath the keys lay a sealed envelope bearing several well-known corporate insignias. Lena traced the logos with her fingers, completely stunned. Porch. She asked what all of this meant. Marjorie explained with genuine admiration that this was her grandfather's comprehensive private portfolio. He had intentionally kept these holdings out of view from her parents, trusting no one with them except Lena. Lena felt her throat tighten as she recalled how her parents had always claimed he had ruined his finances in his later years. Porch. Marjorie gave a quiet sigh, clarifying that 10 years ago, her parents had made aggressive legal attempts to seize his estate. When those efforts failed completely in court, they pivoted to manufacturing a false narrative to save face. Lena reached into the chest and picked up the envelope bearing the Atlas Robotics logo, staring at the print. Porch. She mentioned that she had seen the company in national headlines, valued in the billions. Marjorie confirmed it calmly, adding that her grandfather had been one of their primary angel investors back in the late 80s, stepping in to provide crucial backing when the firm was just starting out. The room seemed to spin slightly. Lena asked if he had ever liquidated his equity. Porch. Marjorie stated that he had never sold a single share, and that the entire partnership interest had been transferred directly to her. Lena was completely speechless. Her grandfather was not just someone who had managed his finances well. He was an exceptionally sharp, strategic, and patient investor who operated quietly behind the scenes. Porch. Meanwhile, her parents had spent their lives chasing shallow status at country clubs, completely blind to the depth of his acumen. Marjorie continued carefully, explaining that their initial review indicated her total asset base far exceeded the $63.8 million in liquid funds displayed on the morning console. Lena asked in a whisper how much more. Porch. Elliot lowered his voice, stating that factoring in all holdings, the overall valuation moved well into high 8-figure, potentially 9-figure territory, depending on current market assessments. A dry, disbelief-filled sound escaped Lena's lips. It was not laughter from joy, but the sheer absurdity of the contrast. Porch. She covered her face with her hands, pointing out that only hours ago, her parents had dumped her onto the street alongside a bag of literal trash. Neither banker interrupted. There was no need to. Lena took a moment to steady her breathing. Her parents' parting words still echoed in her memory, calling her incapable, weak, and useless. Yet the reality was the exact opposite. Porch. Her grandfather had known all along that she was capable of handling far more than they ever allowed her to believe. When she lowered her hands, her focus had completely sharpened. Marjorie drew a single clean document from the bottom of the stack. Her tone became firm as she explained that before his passing, her grandfather had implemented a protective legal clause within the trust. Porch. If her parents or any third party acting on their behalf ever attempted to challenge her inheritance or apply coercive pressure, the bank was authorized to immediately deploy a comprehensive legal framework and secure all access points. Lena asked what kind of legal framework. Porch. Marjorie replied that her grandfather had retained dedicated litigation counsel specifically to safeguard her interests. Vivian Rhodes, widely recognized as one of the most formidable estate defense and high-stakes asset attorneys in the state. Lena blinked, beginning to ask why she would need that level of representation, but stopped herself mid-sentence as the realization hit her. Her parents, George. They had spent years attempting to take control of assets that were never theirs, even if it meant undermining their own daughter. Her grandfather knew that the moment they realized there was real wealth involved, their behavior would turn entirely hostile. He had put every legal defense in place, because he knew she had been walking through a minefield, without even knowing it. George. Elliot slid a heavy black-edged business card across the table. In clean, silver-embossed lettering, it read, Vivian Rhodes, S. Estate Preservation and High Stakes, Asset Litigation. Lena picked up the card, feeling its tangible weight. Marjorie advised her gently but firmly to contact Vivian directly, as she would guide her through the exact steps ahead. George. Lena asked quietly what the next steps would look like. Elliot nodded seriously, explaining that once her parents realized she was entirely beyond their control, especially if they caught wind of the trust's activation, they would likely attempt an aggressive legal challenge to regain leverage. A chill ran across Lena's skin. She asked if he believed they already suspected something. George. Elliot noted cautiously that her physical presence at the bank to activate the trust that morning had likely already triggered inquiries through their informal contacts. Right on cue, Lena's phone buzzed aggressively in her pocket. It was another text from the unknown number. We know you were at Cumberland Bank today. Call us back this second. Do not push this. George. Lena felt the temperature in the room drop. Elliot saw the shift in her expression, his face setting like stone as he told her firmly not to engage with them under any circumstances, neither directly nor through any intermediaries. Lena swallowed hard and looked up, asking what she should do if they tried to corner her again. George. Marjorie answered, with cold, experienced composure, stating clearly that Lena was to say nothing at all, and let her attorney do all the talking. Lena looked down at the business card in her hand, then closed the red folder with deliberate care. The feeling of helplessness was gone. George. The caution was still there, and the upcoming challenge was undeniably daunting, but the sense of being powerless had completely evaporated. Her grandfather had dedicated his later years to building a clear exit from the manipulative environment she had grown up in, constructing an impenetrable defense out of documented facts and undeniable proof. George. She stood up, holding Vivian's card firmly in her hand, a steady resolve finally settling in her eyes. She told the two bankers that she was ready. Ellie offered a respectful nod of agreement. When Lena stepped back out through the heavy brass doors into the Chicago winter, the city no longer felt like a cold, hopeless dead end. The road ahead would be challenging and demanding, without a doubt. George. But she finally had something undeniable to stand on: her independence, her agency, and a future written entirely on her own terms. This time, she was not going to give an inch. I let out a sharp breath, my voice shaking with complete disbelief as I pointed out how entirely absurd this was, considering that until yesterday I did not even know a trust empire existed. George. Vivian cut in calmly, her sharp gaze entirely steady. She explained that the truth rarely mattered to people driven purely by control. Their focus was entirely on regaining leverage, and this manipulative strategy was designed specifically to cloud the waters. George. A formal claim of elder exploitation would trigger mandatory state-level reviews in Illinois, meaning adult protective services or state investigators would be legally required to review medical histories, financial transfers, and my entire relationship with my grandfather over the past several years. George. I gripped the edge of the conference table, feeling the room tilt around me, asking how anyone could simply manufacture something like this out of thin air. Vivian set her jaw, noting that they understood the legal system well enough to try to weaponize its procedures. George. But she added that they had made a critical miscalculation by vastly underestimating the evidentiary record we had prepared to counter them. She pulled a slim, transparent file from the stack and slid it directly across the table to me. George. She explained that late last night, through an emergency court subpoena, our team had legally secured internal email correspondence sent from my parents to their newly retained defense attorney. With trembling hands, I opened the folder. The text blurred for a brief second before snapping into sharp, undeniable clarity right before my eyes.